Hello and welcome to Get Informed, America, the show that breaks through the mainstream media box to bring you real, smart news. Hi, I'm Dave Okenquist, and joining me is the editor of InformedAmerican.com and the smartest man I know, Mr. Rodney Johnson. Rodney, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Dave. How are you?
I'm great. It's always great to have you here each and every Friday to break down the news of the week. And Rodney, as the House is set to vote on the COVID-19 stimulus package, 1.9 trillion, by the way, not a small chunk of change, Rodney.
No.
You wrote on one provision that you noticed, you wrote on InformedAmerican.com, COVID relief bill includes 21,000 in paid leave for federal employees who stay home to virtually school their kids. And as you note, this is $1,400 per week or $35 per hour, which would be the equivalent of $70,000 per year for up to 15 weeks. And in the language in the bill, it's not even really if you're forced to stay at home or anything like that. It's basically if you want to. So who wouldn't take that? And that's great work if you can get it, Rodney.
It is. I don't begrudge, leave and the rest of the language in the bill about this federal leave is about if you are forced to quarantine, if you are, helping an elderly relative that has COVID. I get that, right? But everybody who has kids is struggling with this whole stay-at-home thing and virtual learning and all that. That's a problem for people everywhere. Yeah. And so they're having to juggle their job and their kids. And so I look at this and it's like, well, wait a second, what makes the federal government different? And we all know the answer. They don't have a P&L. Right? There is no P&L. And so they can choose to just borrow money to pay for this. It's like, well, now what you're doing is saying that me, the taxpayer, has to foot the bill for people staying home from their federal job to handle virtual school for their kids. I've got a real problem with that. I don't think that's the role, and it's certainly not the role of a relief package. And so it's just one more thing that's in a $1.9 trillion bill that's going to get lost in the shuffle. Nobody's going to care about this. But it certainly frustrated me.
Yeah, and good to point it out. And by the way, there will be on the table so far. There could be for non-federal workers, for families, up to $14,000 of relief included. That's no small chunk of change either, for families with kids. What do you make of that big number? Because that's I mean, not quite the 21,000 here, but that's a that's a hefty figure.
Well, I remember this is in addition to, right? Because some of those things are also going to go to federal employees who happen to have kids. And so it's not just 21,000 for federal employees. When you add some of these other things, the number goes up more because you get some of these relief payments for kids in general. There's a much larger argument about what it costs to raise children, the benefit to society of having kids, and how much of a role the federal government has in that. And so we don't favor kids as much as other nations do with our tax structure, but does any nation do it well? And I bring that up for a very specific reason. Developed nations are not having children at a rate that will replace the population, and they haven't for some time. The US kind of peaked back up to that level for a few years, 2004, 5, 6, 7, but then fell away, and we're well below it now. And so developed nations around the world have tried to encourage people to have kids by offering tax rebates or one-time payments, but none of it has been shown to work. There's not a level yet that we've hit because we're not making the big stretch. It's not $2,000 when the kid is born or $1,500 a year. It's you show me how to make the strokes for childcare, which costs more than college tuition in many states in the United States. And all of a sudden, I can do this. But until you show me how to make that stroke every year, I cannot afford to do this on what I make. And so this is a step that direction, I think. And of course, it's packaged in this, COVID bill as a one-time thing, but then Mitt Romney is talking about this elsewhere for bigger payments. And that's the conversation we should be happening. We shouldn't be forcing something into a relief package that's supposed to handle a very specific one-time instance. We don't think we're going to have a pandemic again next year. So.
Now that plan, as I understand it, would have some offsets on some of other, for the lack of a better term, welfare programs in the federal government. Is that sort of the idea?
Well, actually, Romney's plan, no. Romney's plan, I think, is truly just stepping up as a tax credit instead of a tax rebate. The amount every person with a child gets, and it's several $1,000s for a child up to, I think, 6, and then a little less, but not much less for children over 6 and still under 18. And so the point is, if you aren't paying federal taxes because your income isn't high enough, you don't get tax rebates. And so it doesn't help you. And so the exact people we want to be getting this, which would be, the working poor, are not getting it because they don't have to pay federal taxes. But if it's a tax credit, then you actually get the money no matter what. Then you have a reason to go file your taxes because you're going to get a check. And Romney's thing actually goes further than this. It pays you monthly. So it matches up to when your expenses are instead of just once a year. And so whether people agree with it or not, I think that's the conversation we should be having.
Yeah, interesting points there. And as going back just a second, as you mentioned, the cost of childcare, of course, now to raise a child, most people have to have both the father and the mother working, usually full time. And then, of course, they're not home. So they have to pay someone to watch the kids. And that was something I mentioned in a video yesterday on the $15 minimum wage, which appears to have been killed by the Senate parliamentarian. So that is off the table, at least for now. But it's something to think about. Of course, down the line, that child care worker will also get a raise to $15 an hour. So there doesn't seem to be many good solutions out there, Rodney.
Well, I mean, but look at what we've been doing, right? And so at some point, it's like, well, I've gotten this so inexpensively for so long, I'm used to it in my budget, right? And so it happens in many things. And when we talk about raising pay, what we're talking about is raising cost. Because it always flows down to the consumer. It's never paid by a corporation. It's never paid by the government because it comes back to us as taxpayers. And so the question is it something where we should be paying more? We just haven't been. And to your point, I believe, is that if we then say, hey, you're going to have everybody get $15 an hour, and right now they're making 11 as childcare workers, you're increasing the cost of that labor intensive thing by roughly 40%. I mean, this is a big number, right? And so then you just make that childcare that people are struggling with even more expensive. And so then what do you do on the backside? Do you create an even bigger tax credit? So yeah.
There are consequences down the line. Although I was clear in my video yesterday. I encourage everyone to check that out. Just because this may be shot down in this COVID-19 relief bill doesn't mean this isn't $15 minimum wage isn't coming back. But I think at the end of the day, we're still left with the issue of families struggling to pay their bills and not making enough to having to, having two people work and all that sort of stuff. So none of that is solved quite yet. I'm not necessarily that raising the minimum wage solves that, but either way, it does remain a big issue in our country, Rodney.
Well, it does. And it's not lost on me that it's favoritism. If I say, I'm going to use federal dollars to encourage people to have children because in the long run, I believe it's better for society to have more kids so that we can keep workforce population, that sort of thing, then I'm specifically favoring parents over non-parents because I'm saying I want to help pay for this group that's having kids that are making that choice. And then some people can't have kids, right? A lot of people just choose not to. And so why is it that their dollars are going to be used for something that they're not doing? That's where I get back to representative government. It shouldn't be tucked into a very large bill that has other things. And I'm glad, it shouldn't be tucked into a bill. It should be debated on its merits. And then we decide as a nation what we want to do.
Yeah, I agree 100% on that. These giant bills are absolutely ridiculous.
Right.
So 100% on that. And I think most people do agree. Rodney, I want to move on to something a little bit silly, but also just a little bit alarming. It's come to this. A story in Informed American you wrote, Disney Plus streaming service puts offensive warning on the Muppets.
On the Muppets.
Seriously. And I covered this partially in an earlier video, and I related my trauma as a man of Swedish descent. The depiction of the Swedish chef, I think I'm still having nightmares about it. I have not recovered from that. Rodney, were you subjected to any trauma? If you want to, if you're comfortable enough, this is a safe space. If you want to share maybe how you were affected by the Muppets TV show.
I happen to be a pretty big Muppets fan as a young man, particularly the animal character who was the drummer, with the wild hair that went everywhere, to the point where a good friend of mine, when I was in college, late college, happened to meet Jim Henson, the creator of the Muppets, and got me a signed photograph of that character. And so the Muppets, I don't know, I have a soft spot for it. And I've got no trauma. I was way too worried about other things like, getting through school and paying attention to my grades and all the things that happen in middle school that you can't stand. And so anyway, I've got nothing for it. I think it's the silliest thing ever. and it opens up the box even bigger, right? The Pandora's box of offense. That's what this is. Anyone can be offended. And if I create a forum of 1,000 people in a room and start talking, I can guarantee that within an hour, no matter what I'm talking about, I will offend someone.
Yeah.
And so we're making it to where the people who develop content are now responsible for an offense that somebody else feels. And that's an unwinnable game. And so if you don't like something, turn it off. Don't listen, change the channel, don't go, whatever it is. But don't tell me later how you're traumatized because you happen to sit there and listen to or watch something.
I mean, who knew Jim Henson was such a monster all those years? But Rodney, I think this is an important point to make right here, which is, as you say, it opens up the door. And I don't need to go down the laundry list of silly things that we've laughed at and mocked and moved on. And then before you know it, a year or two later, that's now the mainstream position. So is there a way yes, it's silly. It's just the Muppets, okay? And you got to sit through this 12-second spiel about, how bad it was and all that. But
I'm pushing back. It is not the mainstream position. And this goes back to something else that happened over the past week. Rush Limbaugh passed, right? And people love Rush. They hated Rush, whatever. I didn't listen. While I agree with some of the points he made, his manner was something I couldn't take after a few minutes. And so I know a lot of people love him, whatever. But that's not the point. The point is that the cancel culture that we talk about, we've now labeled today, although I didn't have that label a few years ago, they were after Rush many, many times. And so one of the things that people used to do to try to get Rush off the air was go to his advertisers and say, you're supporting something that so many people hate. We're going to put a big message out there. Everybody should boycott you because you advertise on Rush Limbaugh.
Right.
And Rush Limbaugh did a great job of going back and showing the advertisers that those messages were coming from exceptionally few people. They were able to put out a lot of messages, but there just weren't many of them. And so when you say has become mainstream, it's like, well, let's ask ourselves, how many people are worried about a message on the Muppets that they're offensive? And I think the number is really small. I think it's the people who run Disney Plus, and then 6 people out there who are trolling every large company they can to say, oh, I'm offended and I'm bothered. And by the way, I might sue you. And so I think it's just corporate America continuing to cover their butts over all this, and it just, I find it silly and a terrible use of resources. I don't think it's mainstream at all.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not, I didn't say it was popular, but
what mainstream means, right, is most everyone agrees.
Right, but but mainstream in terms of the people who control basically the levers of power in the content.
Okay, so here's the short answer to all this. Put a warning label on everything. And Dave, I strongly encourage you do this with this show. By this time next week, I want you to have a crawler on the screen that says, warning, some viewers might find the content of this show to be offensive because of language, points of view, or characterization of, historical cultures. And just put that warning label on every single thing that happens, right? You might be offended. And that could be it. We need to adopt a global warning label that every company can use. Warning, you might be offended. And then just shoot it out the door. And it will become just as meaningless as the car alarm you hear next door.
Well, what do you think about that, readers and viewers? Is it high time to put this offensive show, slap a warning label on it? Let us know what you think about the Muppets. Let us know what you think about the COVID-19 relief bill as we're going along. We love getting comments from you. And yeah, I think this was, yes, it was silly, but not really. I think this was worth spending some time on. Rodney, sort of in the same vein, as there's offensive stuff going on there, people getting censored, and certainly conservatives have been feeling like they've been censored and not having a voice. But there may be hope coming, Rodney, in the form of Qatari news agency Al Jazeera, which has announced that it is launching a new conservative media outlet called Rightly. Wow, I mean, you couldn't get anything from your own country, but maybe an Arab news service can help you out, American conservatives. Rodney, did you get a chance to check this out?
I did. So Al Jazeera, right? It's a news outlet.
Yes, it is.
And they have reporters that do some good work. I mean, there's some news stories on Al Jazeera that are worth reading. Here's my problem with Al Jazeera. It made Al Gore rich. And so we can't go past, or I can't go past the fact that Al Gore, when he got out of office, one of the things he did was try to create a media outlet, a news channel that was going to be all about whatever Al Gore wanted, right? And so it got 6 viewers, but it did have the right licenses to broadcast in the United States. And so a cable channel. And so Al Jazeera bought it from Al Gore and his other backers. And I believe the number was around $500 million. And so that group made Al Gore wealthy for no reason whatsoever, and then became a news source that few people watched. And so now they're like, well, this ain't working. Let's go get the conservatives on board. Yeah. And so I struggle with the irony of this being something that came from Al Gore.
Yeah, and for me, this is ostensibly going to be a sort of middle of the road conservative type outlet. So it remains to be seen what happens there. I'm not too impressed by this so far. We'll see what happens. Apparently, the staff is very angry because it's a very left leaning organization as it is. So it remains to be seen. But hey, this you may see something called Rightly, a news channel, and who knows? I mean, it may not even be so obvious that it's run by Al Jazeera. So it's something to pay attention at, and if it does come down to like, hey, maybe it could be good programming. Who knows? Now, Rodney, I want to take you to our final story. Chicago legislator wants to ban a video game to reduce crime. As you start the article saying, Chicago has a problem. Actually, the city has a lot of problems, but crime is one of the major issues. They've seen a major crime spike. Now, in Rodney, here, and this is to the issue of carjackings. 218 carjackings in January alone. And the state legislature, Marcus Evans, he says he's blaming this on Grand Theft Auto. You see, they play the video game and then they want to emulate it, and they go out and they commit the crime. Rodney, do you lay the blame on Grand Theft Auto for this recent spike in carjackings?
So there's an old question out there, chicken and egg question: does art imitate life, or does life imitate art?
Yeah.
I struggle with the idea that people get the idea for carjackings from Grand Theft Auto, because carjackings have been around longer than video games. And so it doesn't seem like, we've got the thing correct, but it does happen sometimes. Tom Clancy wrote a book many years ago, and in it, there was a pilot of an airline that faked some issue with the airplane. He had to fly an empty plane back to wherever. But what he did instead was fly the plane into the capital of the United States. And so this book was in the late 80s, early 90s, and Clancy happened to meet a person in the military after that, and the subject came up, and he said, well, clearly you guys have planned for this sort of thing, right? And he said, well, we are now, right? Because Clancy was writing about something that perhaps they hadn't considered happening, and then 9/11, all the things, right? And so things do happen that are novel, where, somebody in the art world does something, and then somebody else goes, hey, maybe. But this is not that case. This is really just, we have a lot of violence out there, and we mimic it in video games because that's what people want. And while I find that a really depressing statement, that's what happens, right? It doesn't matter. Sit down and watch television and flip through, and a lot of what you're going to see is blowing stuff up and killing people. And so it's just, it's what we glorify right now. And so I don't think banning the video game is going to help.
I don't either, and I can't imagine there's any tie to the spike to the video game, even if people were imitating it. Now, this video game has been around since 1997, so hard to blame January spike on a game that's been around that long.
I think it's much more likely that we see the police in Chicago rethinking how they go about their jobs after the last year.
Well, not if it's
easy. This is happening in cities around the nation, right, where policemen on the ground, like day-to-day jobs, are rethinking how they engage the public because there's so much going on.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. And my final thoughts: I've played that video game. I've in that video game, I've jacked many cars, killed a lot of people, but
never been motivated to go out and do it in real life. Is that where you are?
That did not spill over into real life.
I think I'm feeling threatened or offended by this show now.
You should be. Yeah. Well, that's all we got for this week. Rodney, thank you so much for joining. Thank you all so much for watching. I want to know what you think about all this content that we've discussed. Give your thoughts down below. If you're watching on Facebook, please hit the like button, share this video with your friends. If you're watching on YouTube, please also hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to our channel to get more content like this. Of course, we always want you to head on to informedamerican.com. You can sign up for our free email newsletter. And also we want you to comment down below. Many of you have been commenting on our actual homepage, so we'd love getting that feedback. Rodney, if they head on over, they sign up for our free newsletter, what kind of stories can they expect to get in the coming week?
Well, I unfortunately, I think it's still going to be the stimulus, right? A lot of craziness going on. Some things going on in the stock market, right, with yields going higher. But I think we're going to start hearing about the next thing. And so the relief package is one thing, but on the agenda out there is an infrastructure package that the Biden administration has been talking about. And once this relief package goes through, that's going to be the next big thing on the agenda. And they want it by May, is what I understand. And so people are going to be talking about the next big spend.
We will be here to cover all of that. Thank you all for watching. For Rodney Johnson, I'm Dave Okenquist, telling you to get informed, America. Have a great weekend.
You've been listening to Get Informed, America, brought to you by the Informed American Radio Network. Please like and subscribe today in order to get new exclusive weekly episodes. Any questions, thoughts, or comments can be sent directly to info@informedamerican.com. And don't forget to visit informedamerican.com to keep up with real, smart news. Until next time, fight fake news and find common ground.